Hi, my guest today is Ms. Tara McLean, a licensed professional counselor, educator, mentor, and mental health advocate with more than 25 years of experience working with children, adolescents, and families. Throughout her career, Tara has worked in both educational and therapeutic settings, helping young people navigate anxiety, stress, life transitions, and the many challenges that come with growing up. But what stands out the most about Tara's approach is her belief that counseling is a collaborative process that's built on trust and genuine human connection. She's also been an incredible mentor to me as I developed this podcast project, so I'm especially grateful to have her here today. So, Tara, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Shanti. What nice words. I really appreciate that. And it's been my pleasure to help and mentor you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to start by going back to the beginning for a moment. So, you've spent more than 2 decades working with children and families, and it's clear that helping young people is something that you're deeply passionate about. So, can you tell us a bit about how you got into this profession and what first inspired you to work with children and adolescents?
I've loved working with children since I can remember. I was probably just a little more than a child myself when I was working with children, be it summer camps, volunteering at church. I've always loved children and gravitated towards them. I started a career in elementary education. But in middle school, I always thought I'd like to be a teacher and a psychologist. That's what I thought. I knew that emotions were important and the human psyche was important. And it fascinated me. So I went on to be an elementary education major and a psychology minor. I taught for years. And then in the classroom, I realized that I cared a lot more about how the students felt. I wanted them to love coming to school and to love learning and to feel like they were smart and capable. And so I got my master's in counseling and I taught for a few more years and then transitioned to start a counseling job at where I was had been a teacher. So that was really great. The teachers were so excited to have that extra support for their students and I loved it. And then I went to the middle school level and that was a little more academic. And then I had a colleague that just said, we would be together for professional development and she said, Tara, you have to become a therapist. I have all these students in my school, she was a school counselor as well, that they need you would be so great, you need to do this. And I, oh, my kids are young or this or that, and I had sort of excuses. And then finally I said, okay, what am I waiting for? Let me just start this process. And um and that's where it was born. And I just love it. I'm still a school counselor. And then I do the counseling thing, which both are my passion, but I just love the counseling and then sort of stumbled into the selective mutism.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think it's clear from, the way you talk about your work that relationships are really at the center of everything you do. And over the years, you've worked with so many young people facing different challenges. But today we're focusing specifically on selective mutism. So when people hear the word selective mutism, they often focus on the fact that a child isn't speaking. But what do you think that they should be paying attention to instead?
Well, a lot of times first, what they'll say is this child won't speak. This child's refusing to speak. And so I will gently correct and say they can't speak. They want to speak. We all want to share, but they can't. And then what the next thing I'll talk about to your question is this is an anxiety disorder. I was just having this conversation not that long ago with a colleague, at teaching, and they just, or actually was another counselor, and they just didn't understand. I said, this is an anxiety disorder. It's like where some people can't get on an airplane. They're rendered frozen and panicked and they just can't get on that plane, or they see a spider and they're freaking out, or they don't want to go underwater. This just impacts their speech, and this is just where they're it's in it, and the way their anxiety is sort of shown to the world in the lack of being able to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important point because, from the outside, people only see the silence, but underneath that, there's a lot more going on emotionally. In your experience, what emotions are children with selective mutism carrying that adults don't always recognize?
Besides the anxiety, I think there's frustration. I think there's shame and embarrassment. They want, there's a desire to speak. Most children want to be able to say, I like that game too, or no, I don't want to play that, or I don't want you to do that, or I'm hurt, or I need to use the bathroom, or whatever it is. So I think there's those prevalent feelings of that frustration and sadness maybe, but definitely there's some shame too and confusion. They don't understand like why can't I? Everybody else can. It's like it should be able to speak and then other adults, well-meaning adults, come on, you can do it, just do it, why aren't you talking, and ask them questions that they can't answer, and I think that can be really frustrating as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think those emotions, like they don't just stay in the classroom or at home. They can affect almost every part of a child's life. Um, what are some ways that selective mutism can affect a child's friendships, confidence, and sense of belonging, even outside of speaking situations?
I think it's very limiting. I'm actually always surprised, and so many of the clients I've worked with have had friends, and children can be very loving and patient and kind and accepting, especially at the younger ages. So kids with selective mutism, I don't think there's anyone better at gesturing and using facial expressions to get their point across and communicate in their way. And so they can still be fun friends, but it's limited. They often won't go to a party, won't have a child at their home, won't be able to, again, say those similarities. I have that too, or I don't want to play that, or I would love a snack, or I'm thirsty right now. So there's just it's going to stifle them a bit in who they can be and in the experiences they can have.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I agree with all of that. And I think that one challenge is that adults are always trying to help these kids, but they don't always know what the child is experiencing internally. So, if a child with selective mutism could sit down and tell every adult exactly what they need, what do you think they would say?
What do they need? I think what I think they could I think it would be difficult for them to describe what they need because I don't know if they can always articulate that. But I think what they want to be able to communicate. They want to not feel so scared. They want to not feel stuck and frozen. And so what I know they need, I don't know if they can communicate that, but what I know they need is for people and adults to put them in places where they are supported, they know what to expect, and they know what they're going to be rewarded for, to do little parts of bravery. So to put them in a position where they're going to feel a little uncomfortable, but they know what they have to say, and they know how they have to say it. Maybe it's mouthing at first, maybe it's a whisper at first, maybe it's a soft voice, and they're going to answer, but they know they'll be rewarded, and no one's going to rescue them. Because again, these well-meaning adults, loving parents and teachers and siblings and friends, answering for a child, make allowing them to avoid, that's not what they need. So again, I don't most of the kids, they don't want to necessarily be put in a position where they're getting what they need. They need to feel uncomfortable a little bit, and that's hard. Who wants to feel Nobody wants to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about like these well-meaning adults. Like a lot of parents probably want to help as much as possible, but they're also worried about doing the wrong thing. In my experience, what do you think some of the most common things well-meaning parents do that may actually reinforce anxiety?
As I mentioned, the speaking for them. So an adult,
Yeah.
a stranger comes over and a neighbor comes over. Oh, what's her name? And maybe you're a child and you look at your mom, you hide behind her leg, and your mom's a little embarrassed. She doesn't want the neighbor, to feel uncomfortable. Oh, this is Shanti. Oh, Shanti, how old are you? You stay quiet. You hide behind your mom again. Oh, she's 4 years old, right, Shanti? And so they answer for them, or they'll avoid situations in general. So, oh, my child's very shy. I'm not going to sign her up for dance or soccer or piano, or I'm not going to have a friend over because I don't want to feel that discomfort. Maybe we won't go to that barbecue or that park or the family function because I don't want everyone to feel uncomfortable. I don't want her to feel uncomfortable or my child to be quiet or be clinging to me. So they avoid. And it's counterintuitive, but it's the opposite of what they should be doing. But how do you know? If you don't know, you don't know. You're just doing what you think is best because you love this child and you want to protect them.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone has good intentions. On the flip side, though, there are things that parents do that can actually make a tremendous difference. So, what are some of the most powerful things parents can do to help a child build confidence and independence?
So again, setting expectations, planning, getting other adults involved. So maybe it's you have a neighbor and they're very understanding and kind and soft spoken. You say, okay, when you see us out, we're going to go to get the mail. When you see us at the mailbox, when you see us at the park, I want you to just ask. I keep using you, Shanti, so hopefully they don't mind. You're just going to ask Shanti, "Oh, what color purse do you have today?" And Shanti's holding a pink purse, and and then just wait. I will, and then we'll look at Shanti. She may say nothing, and then you could just repeat it. Oh, what color purse? Maybe she's going to hold up that purse to you. Say, "Oh, I see you holding up your purse. It's so pretty. What color is that?" And mom will have prepped her to say, all right, if someone asks you a question, if someone asks about your purse or your age, you're going to answer. And when you do, you're going to get a sticker on your chart. And with that sticker, Shanti knows she's going to get rewarded. They're maybe working with a therapist who can support all of this because sometimes when the therapist gives it, it's a little bit more novel. And so those are some of the things, the ways that a teacher, I mean, a parent can help planning ahead with a teacher in school, communicating. And that parent, it's hard because again, there's a feeling of embarrassment. They don't want to put people out. They want to make people feel uncomfortable. They may feel different. They have a child that they know speaks totally fine in their house, but is sort of awkward and not speaking in front of others. So there's a lot of emotions that the parents hold as well. They may think, what did I do wrong? So for that, parent sort of has to put themselves out there to feel a little uncomfortable themselves and say, all right, you can ask Shanti that question, and all right, and then if Shanti doesn't answer, I'm not answering for her. So I'm the parent. I'm not going to say pink. We're going to say, okay, we'll try it again another day, and Shanti will tell you what color her purse is. And that
Yeah.
feels really uncomfortable. But as a parent, it's working through those kind of things.
hmm Yeah, I like what you said about the rewards chart. I actually used to have one as a kid too. Like if at the gas station, if I handed the gas station employee the credit card and I said, fill up with regular, please, that would earn me like 3 points and I would like get ice cream or something. And it was really helpful for me. And I did a lot of that in school too. Like if I raised my hand, like that was a big one, so that would get like 5 points. And I think children spend like a huge portion of their lives in school, which means teachers and school staff can have a major impact as well. So what have you seen teachers or school staff do that helps children with selective mutism feel safe, included, and supported?
I've worked with some amazing teachers and speech pathologists and counselors and school psychologists and nurses and teachers. I think the key thing is the willingness. It does take a little extra effort, a little extra time, a little extra patience, but working the willingness when a school's willing to work with a parent and with me and set goals. Sometimes they'll do like a Google Doc and it'll say like Shanti's brave talking. And then they'll plug in, this is what they did today. They raised their hand and answered a question. I just got something back from a client I saw this afternoon. It was like she raised her hand in music and answered the question in her regular voice and did such a great, like, that's huge. A child who wasn't speaking at all, at the start of the school year before I started working with her. So, when teachers are just willing to do that, ask those first choice questions, listening to the coaching. A lot of times I'm a therapist, but I say I'm a coach. I'm coaching the parents, I'm coaching the teachers, and just their willingness, just always knowing that they're not going to make the child feel badly about not speaking. And teachers don't do that. I've never had that happen, but also not overreact when they speak, just that calm, great job, or the patience, like they may try and it's not working, it's not working. And then we were like, okay, let's think outside the box. How else? Let's try a different environment. Let's change this variable. Let's put this variable, let's not change this variable. And they're willing. So it's really that willingness that when they start, just going that little extra step, that I think that the child just feels it because then they care. Teachers that do that care, and the child inherently will feel that, and they get little stickers or just that feeling that it feels good when kids start being able to communicate. It feels so good for them, and then they almost sort of forget that they couldn't. I don't know if that happened to you, but it was like I've had kids be like, "Wait, I didn't used to be able to do that." Like, no, you didn't. So it's neat.
Yeah, that definitely happened to me. I can relate a lot to what you're saying. Um, and I like what you said about how the teacher's willingness to really just listen and make a difference, like that's all that matters. And I think like something I've thought about a lot is that a lot of people and teachers alike like often assume that being quiet means that you're comfortable, but I think those two things aren't always the same. So why is it important for adults to look beyond a child's silence?
Oh, there's so many reasons. I mean, specific to selective mutism, there's a whole underlying anxiety there, and the more comfortable they get, if the teacher can be silly, if the teacher can spend that time alone with them or allowing them to be with a friend in a group. There's so many things they can do that that opens up that silence because the anxiety level goes down. But you know, if they think they don't want to speak or they're unwilling to speak, a lot of times selective mutism is misunderstood for defiance. And most, at least 9 out of 10 times, probably more, that's not the case. So just understanding that this is something that they just can't do. And it's hard for, I think, any of us, even people who have had selective mutism. It's like I just can't get the voice out. And so to not worry about why is it that I don't know, why don't you like spiders, why are you afraid of the ocean? It's just how it presents itself. But to know that these are children that want to speak, these are children that can speak, because selective mutism isn't an autism disorder or a communication disorder. It is anxiety based. So they want to, and they just need a lot of patience and love and support, and very specific, in my opinion, supports in place to help facilitate that. So I don't know,
Yeah.
did I answer your question on that?
Yeah, you did. You did. Yeah, I agree. It requires a lot of support. And I think like a lot of teachers I came into contact with when I was younger were definitely more on the defiant. Like they thought that selective mutism was defiance and they called me obstinate. And I think like it really took a lot of bravery for me to kind of still try to talk in those environments when those teachers weren't being very supportive. And I imagine that you've also witnessed incredible bravery in your career, like supporting children through some very difficult moments. So I wanted to ask, like, what have children with selective mutism taught you about courage?
If that's such a great question, and it's so much. But what's really interesting is that the younger children, it's amazing that they are able to do what they can. And so I guess a couple of things they've taught me. One is that um, courage, reinforcement goes a lot of ways in facilitating and encouraging courage. But also, even young kids have been able to say, no, that's too much, but I could do that. So I always, even when they're little, I like to, they know themselves. And I think sometimes we underestimate. So it's not necessarily, it's about their level of courage but and ability of what they can do. But we underestimate how self-aware sometimes these little ones can be. And the other thing I think is really interesting about courage is that I've seen so many times my clients with selective mutism, once they started speaking, they became bolder on the playground. I had one mom in particular I worked with him when I started with him when he was very young. And very quickly, she said he was bossing kids around, older kids on the playground where he wouldn't speak at all before. Once he started speaking, he just sort of grew into this personality. And I've seen that with other students or other kids as well, in as a student, where they were, they weren't speaking, but then once they spoke, same thing, they were leaders. One of my favorite was actually the first child with selective mutism I ever worked with. She was so impaired by the anxiety that when she first came to work with me, I get very, very silly because laughter is great for anxiety. She would not even let me see her smile. She would cover her mouth. She would hide behind a pillow when I was making her laugh. And and then fast forward, she was doing a group project, and her mom said to me, she got up with her two friends. This is after maybe a year and a half. She got up with two friends and they got shy. So she read their parts too. And so it's like she went from this girl, and she was so smart, but who was too afraid to physically open her mouth in front of someone she was unfamiliar with, to being like, all right, girls, I got this. And, taking the whole thing. So I think the courage, it's once you open that door, I think it can permeate into other areas, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's very interesting. I feel like the same thing happened to me too. I feel like since I was silent for so long, when I actually could speak, it was like I had to make up for all that lost time, like that 14 years of like lost time where I could have been talking to people and sharing my opinions. I just like had to get everything out. So yeah, I agree with that. I definitely was that girl too. Um,
But that's so
but
interesting.
yeah.
And then look at you now doing a podcast. I mean, can you imagine? Someone told your mom 14 years ago, she would have been like, what? The way.
Yeah. It's crazy. I'm still like I don't even I was such a different person back then. But yeah, so before we wrap up, I want to think about the child who might be listening to this episode right now. Like maybe they're afraid to raise their hand in class, maybe they're avoiding speaking to their classmates. And you've spent your whole career, like your career helping young people through challenges like these. So my last question is, what would you want a child with selective mutism and their family to know about what's possible?
First of all, you are not alone. You are not the first to go through this. You will not be the last to go through this, even though it's not so prevalent that you see it all over and you see it in the news. You're not alone. There are other people that have gone through this and have come out the other side. They're currently working through this and they haven't even figured it out yet. So, first, knowing it, that's your first step. There are supports out there for you. You can get help, and there are caring adults that are there to guide you. And it's hard. The work that you will do is hard. It feels hard, but it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you feel that anxiety, and maybe just that first hand the person, the gas attendant, your credit card, right? Maybe you just shout your Starbucks order through the back from the back seat through the window, or maybe you just wave to someone. Maybe those are what can you do that's just a little bit brave each day, and then build on that and keep building, because the more you do that, your muscle gets stronger and stronger and stronger until you're doing all these things you never did before, because your muscles are so strong and you realize I can do this. It may never be super easy. You may not have a podcast one day, but things will get easier the more you do it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I agree with all of that. So yeah, Tara, thank you so much for joining me today. I think one of the biggest themes in this conversation was that every child like deserves to feel understood for who they are. So yeah, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank
If
you so
yeah,
much for having me, Shanti. This is such a
yeah,
pleasure. It's such a passion of mine. So I could go on about it for hours. So, yes,
yeah,
I'm glad you have a time limit.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank
You as
you.
well. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Bye.
If you're a parent, teacher, clinician, or young person who wants to learn more about selective mutism, anxiety, and mental health, please be sure to share this episode with someone who might benefit from it.